Hello, Susan Corbett, custom machine quilter. Today I'm going to walk you through this very scrappy star. The client started out by saying she wanted some quilting that was simple, repetitive, with a vintage look. So I started off by stabilizing, and the idea came to me to do some channel quilting on the diagonal. So in that outer border, you see the channels there in the corner, and then it crosshatches in the middle where those two opposite sides meet, which I think is a really nice look. And so here I am doing more of the channel quilting on the diagonal in the points of the star. This was very repetitive but calm and soothing, good work. I'm using all one color thread, just white. And it's good to do the stabilizing first to be able to let the quilt talk to you. I couldn't decide what to do in here. Every time I thought I had an idea of what would look good, I'd wake up the next morning and think, no, that's all wrong. That's not the way to go. You've seen this quilt before, I'm sure, done in blue and white, and it looks really traditional. But this did not look like a traditional quilt to me. I mean, of course it is, but it looks much more contemporary than that blue and white version, or the red and white. So I looked all over the place and found the design I ended up using, which is just crosshatching with continuous curves. So it is very simple, even though it might look complex. So I stabilized around all the star points and then went for the ditch quilting, as you see here. That's still a little bit tricky, you know. It's not mindless, because the seam allowances go in various directions, so you kind of have to keep up with that. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. You know, ditch quilting, when done properly, is fairly invisible, which is fine here because you want the piecing to show up. I mean, those squares are tiny. They end up being like an inch wide, little bitty guys. This quilt took some time to do. It's quite large. It's a bed quilt. It was pretty slow work, although parts of it I could finally pick up some speed. It wasn't difficult. The difficult part was thinking up what to do. So what I see here, I mean, what I saw right away in stabilizing is that there is a lovely grid already set up by the piecing. So once I had an idea of what to do, you know, then it was just a matter of what increments. A question I hear a lot is, how do you know how far apart to quilt lines? If you're dealing with applique, the rule is, well, the rule as I see it, is your background quilting needs to be smaller than the applique pieces, generally. So like a 2-inch wide crosshatch with little tiny pieces of applique are going to look proportionally incorrect. So in this case, I mean, those triangles are small. The print with the light makes a 1-inch square. So that's about the max, I think. But I ended up picking a complex looking pattern, I guess, motif, See here, you can see that I've used a 2-inch increment, but I've filled in with all that continuous curve. So it looks much busier. It looks like, there's a lot going on. So that width was not too much. It wasn't too big. So what could I have done differently? I could have just gridded the whole thing out 1 inch apart and left it there. There's so much white space here, though. So much white space. When you're dealing with great big fields of empty space, I think there needs to be something going on there, not just a grid. There's nothing wrong with the grid, but this much space is an opportunity to do something really good looking, really pretty. And I wasn't about to let that go past without addressing it. All the quilting I've seen on this type of quilt is feathers with dense background quilting, and that's not what the client wanted. So as I say, I looked through so many designs and bounced a lot of ideas off of her. She didn't want anything very dense, not a lot of trouble, not a whole lot of design. So what fits the bill in my mind is pick a complex fill of some sort. Something with more than one element in it. And the repetition is going to make it look calm and serene and soothing. So I think that's what we ended up with here. So the good part about this is with the grid already built into the quilt, I didn't have to do any marking. Thank goodness. I would not trust a marker to a quilt like this of any kind because you have to get the mark out. I hear all the time that, you just squirt some water on it, or you spray a solution of, baking soda and whatever else, but you're applying a liquid to a bunch of different printed fabrics. And every time I do that, the color runs. And I've asked other quilters, isn't that a problem for you? And they're like, no, what do you mean? That's never happened before. So I guess I live in a whole different world because that happens to me a lot. So I don't mark anything. So whenever I can do a grid-based design without having to mark it, I'm a very happy quilter. So I talk a lot about, let's get a good sequence going so that it can be a continuous line process as much as possible. And that's pretty much what I have happening here. Quilt those straight lines from point to point as much as you can with as few stops and starts as possible, and then go back in and do the continuous curve. And here I'm doing double continuous curve. I found it was really easy to go all over the place and get really lost. Which square have I quilted twice and which have I not? So I like to quilt, curves and curves and curves, but once I've got one square all curved, then that's my cue to fill in with the rest of the curve before moving on to another square. That kept it orderly and sane to me. And if one of those arcs got to be too big, then I could go back and fill in with the second arc inside of the arc in straight line. And I think you'll see that here in a few places. The zen of quilting. As easy as this quilt made, lining up the grid, it still wasn't a fast process. This is not fast, although it was pretty easy, but not the most inexpensive thing you could do either. I think the payoff, though, is huge. Just the, field after field of lines and curves look really gorgeous. To back up a little bit, I stabilized the star and did the quilting in the border before I knew what I was going to do here in all the white space. Had I known what I was going to do, I might have done things a little bit differently. Or would I? I really like to go ahead and stabilize first and then go back and, get it off of two rollers and then go back and do all the fancy parts. I see in retrospect that it might have been nice to extend those lines of cross-hatching from the lines of the channel quilting and the star. But that's only possible if you know what you're going to do. If you don't, and it was not, that was not an arduous encumbrance either. Like it didn't matter that much in the end. So no huge regrets here. So, I always like to go for good contrast. If all the quilting is the same, it ends up being boring. Notice the contrast between the quilting in the outer border and the quilting in the white space. We've got similarity in the lines, but contrast in the scale of them. Cross-hatching in the big empty spaces, channel quilting in the piecing and the white space of the outer border, and that little crosshatch in the center of the outer border, I think adds just a lovely detail. Very happy with that. Doing this much of the same quilting over and over is tremendous practice. So for anybody who wants to become a lot more comfortable with ruler work, quilting grids, or doing continuous curve, you will get that practice nailed down with this much of it. And what I hear all the time is, oh, I'd love to quilt like you do, but yeah. It takes a lot of practice. And so if you have a quilt with this much white space and you're too intimidated to try feathers or, some other showy free motion technique, then this is a great way to have a beautifully quilted quilt and get in a whole lot of practice, because practice is the key. There's no way you'll really develop any expertise or comfort level being afraid to quilt and being insecure. All the practice here with ruler work and freehanding some arcs. Arcs are a mainstay of a whole lot of motifs and quilting designs. So this would really raise the comfort level. And the added benefit of this design in particular is, the payoff was huge in several ways. One is the wonderful texture this design imparts. What you end up with in the middle of that square is what looks like a little circle. It's not, but it just looks gorgeous. And this quilt is full of mistakes, like I say all the time. When you freehand, it's not going to be perfect. I mean, there's no way that it can be. See how the little centers just leap out of there? That is so pretty. So taken all together, you see the whole design, not the individual components. If you do look extremely closely, you will see, the arcs look very freehand. They don't look perfect. They're not consistent, but look what a gorgeous thing we end up with here in the end. It's a beautiful quilt.